Writer's Workshop is a major part of our writing program for this class, and the assignments you create for it will be have a significant impact on your grade. The reason we focus on Writer's Workshop as the significant part of our writing program is because it's authentic writers. Real writers aren't told by their teacher what type of writing to do and how long it needs to be and who their audience is and what their topic should be. Writers make those choices, and part of being a writer, part of authentic writing, is being able to make those choices and being required to make those choices. So with Writer's Workshop, you choose the topic and the style of writing that you want to do. You choose who your audience is going to be. You choose the message, either theme in fiction or thesis in nonfiction. You go through the writing process completely. You request, receive, and choose how to apply the feedback that you get. As a writer, you're making decisions about whether to accept and apply the feedback that you receive or whether it doesn't work for what you wanted with the piece. And then you share your writing with the world. So the writing process is pretty straightforward. We start with pre-writing, which is basically thinking about what we're going to write. We may brainstorm, we plan out, if it's a story, you might plan out the plot or think about the characters. If it's nonfiction, you think about your evidence, and part of pre-writing for this class is what I call the pre-writing for. You need to share with me before you begin drafting the topic, the style, your audience, and your message. Once you've done a lot of the thinking about writing, you draft. And drafting is just getting the words out. You're not looking for the right words. You're just getting words onto the paper. Once you've done your draft, that's when you go back and you look for improving it and making it not necessarily perfect. Our writing's never going to be perfect, but better. You look at your organization, you look at your word choice, you look at the flow of your ideas and the meaning. And the revising and editing process, we revise the ideas first, then we look at editing the conventions. But in the Writer's Workshop process, you will revise and then edit, and you'll get feedback from your peers on your ideas as well. After revision, we edit the conventions, that's grammar, spelling, punctuation. You repeat it as needed. You redraft, and then you go back to the revision stage, and you go through revision and editing, and you redraft, and you revise, and you edit, and you redraft. And you do that as many times as you need. At minimum, you have to do it twice. You have to go through it yourself, and you need to get feedback from 2 of the peers in your writing community. And then when it's polished and it's ready to be shared, you publish it. You might submit it to a contest or to a publisher. You might publish it to your blog, but it is that sharing of your writing that's the publishing process. So in pre-writing, you need to figure out what you're doing. And pre-writing doesn't always entirely happen on paper. Sometimes when we're pre-writing, when we're thinking about what we're going to write, it's through a conversation with our writing communities or our friends, or it's thinking as you're walking to school. It's not necessarily always a recorded process. Once you've figured out what you're going to do, though, you do have to do the pre-writing for and submit that to me for approval before you begin drafting. And that way I know you've decided what type of writing are you going to do. Are you going to write fiction or nonfiction? If you're writing fiction, what genre? If you're writing nonfiction, are you thinking of writing informative, persuasive, descriptive, narrative, what? You need to share the topic. If it's a story, if it's fiction, what's the premise of your story? What's basically going to happen in your story? Usually it's maybe 1 to 2 to 3 sentences. If it's nonfiction, it's just what is the topic? What are you writing about? You need to identify an audience. Your audience is who you are writing for. At minimum, you should identify the age range. The way we write for kindergarten kids is way different than the way we write for 15-year-olds or for 60-year-olds. So an age range is actually really important. You can't just say, oh, it's for any age, because you can't write for any age. You can write for teenagers, you can write for little kids, but you can't write for everybody at the same time. And then depending on what you're writing, you may want to consider as part of your audience, how much do they know about your topic? If you're writing about, for example, skateboarding, and you're writing to an audience who is really familiar with skateboarding and with the terms, you're going to write differently than if you're writing for an audience who has no idea about what skateboarding is or looks like. Finally, you need to share your message. And this is pre-writing. So pre-writing changes over time. This is a working document. But before you begin writing, you should have an idea of what you want people to get out of it. What should they believe about life at the end of reading your story? What should they know? What should they sometimes do in a persuasive piece? You're trying to convince them to take some sort of action. Again, we call it the theme for poetry and for fiction, and we call it a thesis when we're talking about nonfiction, so like essays and reports. Also, in part of your planning for pre-writing, and this isn't something that you're going to submit, but it's something that you might want to consider. If you're writing fiction, think about creating plot diagrams or character studies or setting maps so that you've got an idea of your world and your events before you begin writing. If you're writing nonfiction, you might need to research and identify evidence. Remember to keep track of your sources and citation information to avoid plagiarism and to make sure that you can create your work cited correctly at the end. You might take notes. Drafting's pretty simple. Get the words on paper. Don't go for the perfect beginning. Don't let yourself sit there and try and find the, quote, right word. You can edit, you can revise later. But if you don't have anything written down, you can't revise or edit it. So just get the words on the paper. We always start with revision, not editing. And I'm not going to encourage you to write with bad conventions, bad grammar, or bad spelling. But the truth is that if the ideas are compelling enough, people will read it, even if you have some mistakes in your spelling or your grammar or your punctuation. If it's boring or confusing, people aren't going to read it no matter how perfect your spelling and grammar are. So if you're looking at fiction, when you're revising, these are some of the things that you might look for. You might look at the beginning, the hook. You want to start with action or dialogue instead of a ton of background information, which I call word vomit. That's boring. People aren't interested in reading that. You want to make sure that your characters are interesting and realistic given the genre that you're writing in the context of the story. Show us who they are, with what they do, with their actions, with their thoughts, with the things that they say, rather than describing them in these huge long paragraphs. Look at your plot. Make sure that the things that happen in your story have to happen in order for your story to work. Don't add in extra elements. You want to make sure that you are showing the reader what's happening in the story by using action and dialogue and description, rather than telling them this happened and then this happened and then this happened. It helps them better visualize, which, remember, is one of our strategies that expert readers do. So you need to make it possible for them to visualize your story as if it was a movie playing behind their eyelids. And look at the ending. Make sure that your ending actually resolves the problem instead of sort of sidesteps it. Don't end with, and then they woke up. It was all a dream. Or, and then they died, because it's kind of a cop-out. you need to have an ending that actually solves the main problem that the characters were having in the first place. When you're looking at nonfiction, for your hook, you might choose an anecdote, like a short personal story. You might choose to start with a question or a quote or some sort of dramatic statistic. Again, something that's going to make people want to read more. You want to look at the flow. Are you using transition words and phrases to help connect ideas in your information or argument? You want to look at your evidence. Are you choosing things? Are you sharing examples and evidence that is compelling, that is persuasive, that makes people understand your topic or believe whatever you're trying to make them believe? Look at your organization, that the ideas are organized logically, where one idea leads into the next, and each paragraph is focused around a single main idea. And then in your ending, you want to conclude by reminding your reader of the main points that you've made and how they support this larger message of your piece. And then leave them sometimes with a call to action or something that makes them think. Editing, like I said, is always done after revising. If you change your ideas, then you're going to have to re-edit anyway. And it's looking at spelling, grammar, and punctuation. Always run spelling grammar check. You should keep a list of the words that you often spell incorrectly, and then you can check those words as you're going through your editing and make sure that you've got them done correctly. If you use a thesaurus to find more complex or more interesting or more varied words, make sure that they work in the context of the sentence. Sometimes you have synonyms, words that mean mostly the same thing, but the connotation, the sort of background meaning of them is actually not what you intended to do. If you're not sure, ask someone else or ask me. You need to check your grammar. Again, spelling grammar check or grammarly.com is really good for this. You want to make sure that you have complete sentences, not run-on sentences, not sentence fragments. So they have, at minimum, a subject and a verb. Check your verb tenses. This is usually more of a problem in fiction than it is in nonfiction, but if you're writing in the present tense, stay in the present tense. If you're writing in the past tense, which most stories, although not all, are written in the past tense, stay in the past tense. Don't switch back and forth. And then make sure that you're using paragraphs properly, that you've got capital letters at the beginning of sentences, and with proper nouns, all of the sort of regular conventions. With punctuation, every sentence should end with ending punctuation, either a period, an exclamation point, or a question mark. You need to make sure that your dialogue is properly punctuated, and make sure that you are using apostrophes correctly and quotation marks correctly. So you draft, you revise, self-revise, and self-edit. And then you go back and you do a second draft. And you get peer feedback from at least 2 people in your writing community. You look at their feedback and you decide what suggestions you're going to take. It's your choice because it's your writing. And then you rewrite it into a third draft. If you have a lot of changes to make from your second to your third draft, you should self-revise and edit again, going through the whole process. If you only have a few changes, look through it again really quickly to make sure that you didn't miss anything and then move on to the publishing stage. Often a really good way to revise and edit is to read it out loud to yourself. You have to slow down usually when you do that, and you're more likely to catch some of the errors. And then publishing is just, it's good copywriting shared with your audience. You might publish it online to your blog. You might create a separate blog just for your writer's workshop, your published pieces. You can, although you do not have to, submit it to a contest or to a publisher. And then you will self-assess it and turn it into assignments in teams. There will be a writer's workshop assignment for me to assess it.